Brad.
Hey, Jules, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Did you have a good weekend? Did you do anything fun for the Super Bowl?
I did. This has nothing relating to today's episode, but I made a new cocktail I hadn't made before. I was a little behind on the trend, but they're called spaghettis. And
what's a spaghetti?
they're Miller High Life.
Sounds like lunch. Okay.
They're I know everyone's like, spaghetti, you disappointed me. They're a cocktail. And I'm like, listen.
Oh, wait, I saw you. Yeah.
Yes.
You totally posted this. You were putting stuff in a Miller High Life bottle.
Yes. So Aperol or Campari in a Miller High Life with a little bit of citrus. My life has changed. I'm like, this is the only way I'm drinking beer now. So that was my weekend. Game changed.
Sweet.
And I had a blast. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I totally got to adopt this program. That sounds fantastic. It looks fantastic.
It's a classy way to drink a beer. Come on.
It's a classy way to drink the champagne of beers.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. But we okay. What?
Didn't we talk about the fact that I think we were talking about champagne at one point, and I think France, there was a port in France that confiscated the Miller High Life that was coming because they called it the champagne of beers and destroyed it because they said you can't put champagne on the label. Like you can only put champagne on the label of champagne. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, I will tell you here in the US of A, the spaghettis are well welcomed and highly recommended if you haven't had one. Brad, have you had one?
No. Totally.
Yeah,
I've had plenty of Miller High Lifes, but not spaghettis. So that's going in the bottle next.
We're going to have a lot of homework to do after today's episode. But first thing on that list is go home, make a spaghetti. You can thank me later. Send us a message thanking me. I'll take it. So that's
cool.
that's part one of our homework this week, because we have a awesome episode today that Brad, I know you're excited because I feel like this is right up your alley, but I'm more so excited because I am so interested to learn how to be better in the specific spirit category, because I'm sure, like a lot of our listeners, it is not for the faint of heart. It's intimidating. And today we have a special guest to kind of walk us through, because Lord knows I am not the expert in the whiskey category.
Yeah, whiskey is one of those things that it seems to be a category everybody's interested in because it's so popular and they want to participate in, but there's so many choices. And people don't know what they might like or even how to drink whiskey, because I see a lot of people drink whiskey and also I'm like, oh, God. It's like, oh, did you take a big hit off that 120 proof, did you? Okay, yeah. They'll strip the paint out of your room. But I like whiskey is something that, I got into early, and that was my entry spirit really. And now, I think I'm still learning after how many years of being in this space. So today we've got Nate Gana with us, who is a whiskey influencer and a damn good one, if you ask me. You can find him on Instagram at Nate, N-A-T-E, Gana, G-A-N-A. He has been featured in Forbes magazine. He recently shared his favorite pours of 2023 on Uprocks. He has been featured on the Bourbon Pursuit podcast. If for those of you who want to learn more about bourbon, sounds like that's a great place to go. And we are going to talk more about this coming up, but we've got Tales of the Cocktail, which is a massive industry event around, and it's so open to people who are industry and people who are cocktail enthusiasts alike. That's coming up in July, and he is going to have the Nate Gana Experience, or is it the Nate Gana Spirits Lounge? And that's the second biggest lounge at Tales of the Cocktail. So I'm guessing Nate knows what he's talking about. And what we're going to do today, Jules, is Nate is going to teach us how to taste whiskey. So he sent us a very specific bottle, and we are going to go through that together. And our listeners are going to learn how to taste whiskey as well, because you know what? I think having a whiskey tasting party might be something that'd be fun to do with your friends, right?
Totally. No, I agree. And again, why I'm so excited about this is because I feel like I've stayed away from whiskey because A, there's a lot of it. B, it always felt like the man's drink, right? Like I never felt like, this is something. But no, I think that we have a bad idea of, women who can drink whiskey, because by the way, it's fantastic. And secondly, what we're going to do on today's episode, which I'm excited about, is not only how to taste it, which is super important, especially in cocktails, but we're going to learn what we should go out and buy if we're just starting out, and what he recommends and how he got to this level. And to be an expert in something is so rare. And so we are not the experts. We bring the experts on. So we are going to get those questions answered for you. So then we have no more misconceptions about the whiskey category. So I'm very excited.
Yeah. Plus, you know what? I think Nate started out as not an expert at one point too. So it'd be good to know how he got started. So let's get to that part and let's talk.
Let's bring him on.
All right. Well, Nate has been waiting in the wings here, and I think we need to hear from Nate. Nate, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. And if you could see me blushing, I'd be blushing by your amazing introduction of me. So that's awesome.
We would love to know, and I'm sure people listening would love to know. All right, so what is a whiskey influencer, and how did you get started in this space?
So it's actually a great question, Brad. It started in a completely different scope than what I'm into now. From a public perspective, it actually started as whiskey as an investment. And that led into becoming fascinated with the drink and obsessed with it, really. So I started with, my mom and I back in the day would go to the duty free every time I'd come home from college, and we'd pick something up. It was our tradition. Every couple of weeks, a couple of months, we'd go to the duty free, grab $100 bottle, and I thought nothing of it other than the fact that they looked really, really beautiful. And about 10 years after that, someone came to the house, a friend of mine, and said, "Wow, that's a really gorgeous bottle. I'll give you $1,200 for it." And I remember that it was Macallan, and I thought, okay, yeah, absolutely. First of all, but that it happened again 3 months later. It was a $500 bottle, and someone said, "I'll give you $3,000 for it," and I was like, "Yes."
What?
And then I was like, "Okay, well, wait a minute. If I've said yes off the first offer every time, what are they doing with it?" And so then I started to look into the commodity aspect of whiskeys, and to give you some reference on where whiskey is now, there is four bottles of Macallan 1926 60 year. One sold for 1.1 million, one for 1.4. 1.8 million for one of them, and then a new record of 2.7 million USD for the most recent 1926 60 year. So a lot of people buy real estate. I buy whiskey. So it's one of those things that's become quite the commodity. Yeah. Wow. So that's what piqued my interest, was the fascination of where did these bottles get their value, and how come, and how did it get so wild so quickly? But really, it's not been that quick. I mean, this started in 1999, I want to say, where things started to go up in the very early 2000s. It was actually the Chinese economy that had kind of figured this out, and were buying really great bottles for a very cheap price, and now they're worth a fortune. It's quite interesting. Wow.
You started it 9 years ago. How long have you been influencing, and how long have you been contributing to the discipline, I should say, whether
Great
it's being quoted or writing something?
So I started this in 2015, and I'm going to be totally honest with you. It was a complete hobby to start the Instagram. I actually restarted it because it was just something that I wasn't committed to, and then I said to myself, I'll commit to it. So I committed to it in May of 2015, and I had 100 followers by early June, and then I had 200 by July, and then slowly I had, thinking to myself, my only goal was, wow, it would be so cool to have 1,000 followers and get free bottles. And by December of 2015, I had 10,000 followers, and I knew that this was going to be something. But still back then, when it comes to the timelines, that was still very, very new for Instagram. It was a much smaller platform. Obviously, this is pre-Facebook, and the model was interesting because nobody believed that it was an advertising platform at that time. Now I would arguably say that it's replacing TV in a lot of ways, but this is now. And so back then, it was a much easier time when we were some of the original few that started this. I would say back then there was maybe 60 or 70 of us that had Instagram accounts dedicated to whiskey. I'd say there's probably 60 or 70,000 of us now that are dedicated to whiskey. So, it's kind of an interesting time. It's really interesting for evolution. Obviously, love the fact that Instagram is an amazing platform, but it was a far easier time to gain followers back then. And I had kind of seen that coming in around 2018 or 2019 and decided that if I wanted this to be a little more than what it is, I'm going to have to expand outside of Instagram, which is what I did. And so here we are today with a couple of very cool things going on, and it's been quite a dream job, to be honest with you. And to be able to impart wisdom to others that want to become involved in this industry is quite a bit different than a typical influencer. So I'm very lucky. I will also say that I went on a trip with an amazing brand to Mexico. I went with Jose Cuervo to Mexico last year. Mm-hmm. And I can definitely, with certainty, tell you, I was the oldest influencer by about 15 years, which was mortifying. I had no clue what I was even doing there. And all the kids that I was with were amazing. But I was like, what in God's green earth am I doing here right now? And yeah, it just reminded me of how old I truly am. And I was like, oh, if I ever thought I'd be cool, I'm not going to be cool. So here we go.
Dude.
This is really what it is.
All right, now I got to ask you, are you comfortable telling us how old you are?
Oh yeah, I'll be 40 in 2 months. So
all right, yeah. I just turned 51, Nate, so stow it.
Come on, Uncle Brad. Come on, Uncle Brad. Don't toy with my emotions. I'm a fragile individual, Uncle Brad. And I think Jules is much, much younger than both of us. And
she's still in like the prime of life right now. I mean,
wow.
She only needs to go to the doctor
I'm in my
year.
late 20s. I'm getting old.
I wouldn't mind drinking some of this booze in front of me to wipe away or wash away my sorrows.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But
she wakes up in no pain.
But you guys have years of wisdom.
What's interesting is that as much as I adore whiskey, I judge in quite a few competitions globally, and we drink about 100 spirits a day over anywhere from 3 to 7 days, and I've become very intimate with other spirits. Like, let's just say I'm a full-blown alcoholic now. It's really interesting. I can drink literally everything, and right now, if we're just being completely transparent and honest, I have an affinity for mezcal. I have strong love of chartreuse.
Chartreuse.
Yeah, I think that there's so much more out there now, and when you are learning about one category and then you start to taste the other categories, you also treat it the same way as the first category. So you don't drink to get drunk, you drink to learn, and you start to learn about the nuances of each place, and you understand what's going on with right up until the plantations of agaves is probably what the most interesting thing on planet Earth. Like, just going and learning about agave is the coolest thing ever. And so I've always wanted to go to tequila, and I finally have done so. Then you've got the category that not many people here love, but Baijiu is a very interesting category. I'd be very curious to see if you make a Baijiu cocktail.
I've got a bottle of that.
I don't think I've tried that
totally
yet.
Yeah, hold on. Like, you guys keep talking.
Baijiu is a Chinese liquor, and it is a very, very particular category, let's just say.
What is the flavor like?
I can't really speak to the flavor of it.
Okay.
Some people would say that if you like dirty socks, then you like Baijiu. Yeah. Okay. It's an interesting category, but it is extremely fast growing. Oh, you did? Yeah.
Wow.
You found it. Okay.
So, it is the strangest. I mean, I don't know what I'm doing when I bought it. Right.
Yep.
So I bought this bottle because I've always passed it in the liquor store, and I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna buy this bottle and see what it's all about. It's like I liked it, but at the same time I got this like, and it sounds so bizarre. I liked it, but I was like, I got this like sense, like this looming sense that came over me, like this like darkness almost. And I'm like, what is going on inside that bottle? That it's like, I don't know if there's something triggering me in there, but it's a unique flavor, and I know that this stuff can go for thousands of dollars. Right?
Thousands.
So I'm pretty sure I have the low end here, but
no. I mean,
it smells like.
I mean, the high end isn't much better, Uncle Brad. Let me tell you that, buddy.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. I had a buddy of mine, Dave Johannes, if you're listening. He was the first person that ever gave me a sip of like a really nice Scotch, right? It was I think it was an Oban 25 or 27. I can't remember the numbering convention, but it was up there, and I was like, holy crap, this is not what I expected. It was super smooth, really elegant, and I felt bad because I drank the last bit of his bottle. And he was cool with it, But I'm like, well, I'll go to the liquor store and pick him up a bottle and say, hey, thanks, Dave. And I was like, oh, shit, that's like $800. And like that, so we're talking a while ago now,
Wow.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
Get you a bottle of Black Maple Hill. Yeah.
Oh, and you say that now, but I mean, I just one of my bottles of Black Maple Hill just went for I think 6 or 7 or 8,000. So
okay, so was it the Black Maple Hill before they moved the distillery?
It was.
That was my all-time favorite.
Great.
All-time favorite bourbon. All-time favorite bourbon.
Outstanding.
That was the bourbon. Then I was like, I love bourbon, and it was my go-to. And then one day, the liquor store person at the liquor store said, "Hey, you should stock up on this." And I'm like, oh, whatever. Like, where's it going? Totally did. It was $35 a bottle.
Yep.
I mean, and Jules, I'm telling you, I would make an old-fashioned with it, with sugar in the raw, and then I would use the same glass, same ice. I wouldn't clean the glass out, and I would just pour bourbon back into the mixture, and it was like a completely different drink. It was haunting. I still think about that nutty, awesome flavor of Black Maple Hill. Yeah,
pure heaven. Now the current is just I mean, I don't even think anybody even refers to it anymore, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Just what you had
same.
back then was just another level of quality, and those 80s bottles are pure mystère now, so to say, and I mean, impossible to find ever again, especially for the price. Unfortunately, the greatest one ever, if you ever want to know what the greatest right now is, probably the current greatest bottle is Linnell's Red Hook Rye. This is a hell of a story. So Linnell was a store in Brooklyn, and also the same woman by the same name. Amazing woman. She did a 1984-2008 pick, so 24-year, and she called it Red Hook Rye. And it's Old Willett, it's old KBD juice. And she had it for $169.99 back then. And I think one bottle just went for $80,000.
Damn.
I think
How
so.
crazy.
And to be honest with you, when you look at values, just quickly turning the page here, Macallan has the record by far with what they just did. Japanese whiskey, you've got some in the range of, let's say, 500 to 900,000 with Yamazaki and Kurizawa. But bourbon has so much room to grow as a commodity, and so that's where my attention is pretty much full time now. Is in collectible bourbon, because there's so much room to grow when you compare it to Japanese and Japanese and Scotch.
Okay, so that's interesting you say that, because I thought, like, again, I'm an amateur when it comes to like the valuation on these bottles. I thought bourbon was like getting saturated, but
bourbon as a market is getting saturated. It's a very great point, and that's kind of an influx point that it's an inflection point really where we are right now. You are getting a saturated bourbon market when it comes to people competing for drinking space. But when it comes to people collecting bourbon, there's only a finite number of brands that you would go into to collect. And at that, you would eliminate a lot of those bottles and go into the very rare and the older stuff. So like the 80s and 90s collectibles that were released for the Japan-only market are some of the most collectible bottles of all time. But things like that, and that's a great point, Brad, is that the market is saturating immensely right now, which is going to be the demise for a lot of mid-tier brands. I think you'll see that over the next 2 years, and the very best will come out on top. But you'll see some brands fold pretty quickly here.
Interesting.
Okay, well, you two are nerding out and jumping ahead. You said Japanese whiskey, you said bourbon. There are going to be some listeners who are like, yeah, that's all well and good. I've heard of those, but what in the world is the difference? So should we jump into kind of like, what is the whiskey category? What makes a whiskey a whiskey? Is a whiskey with an E or not? And then just like the different categories too, I think is important for our listeners to kind of know.
Absolutely. And it's a great question. So first of all, there's no difference in whiskey between an E and no E. It's just that certain countries have it spelled certain ways, and that's it. There is a difference. So a lot of people, even lately, it's quite shocking, and I don't have the heart to tell them if I'm doing anything with them in a private tasting sense or whatever, but I have a lot of people come up to me and talk to me about bourbon, and then they say, oh, and whiskey too. What I would love to clarify is that the parent category is whiskey, and everything underneath that falls underneath the umbrella of whiskey. So Canadian, American, Irish, Japanese, they're all whiskey. So single malt Scotch whiskey is under the whiskey umbrella. American single malt whiskey, which is what we're going to be tasting today. Bourbon, rye, those are both whiskeys. So understanding that they are still a whiskey, just a different format of producing them, is probably the biggest difference. But great question, because I get that all the time. Pot still is a type of whiskey from Ireland. Pot still is malted and unmalted barley together. There are so many forms, but they're all whiskeys. So yes, it's a very unique category. And now you've got producers from Australia, New Zealand, France, Germany, South Africa, everywhere around the world is now producing whiskey, on the which is so amazing. I think the next big category is Mexican corn whiskey, quite frankly.
I have seen that, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, phenomenal category. Mexican corn is such good quality that you're only going to produce a good quality spirit coming out of that quality of the corn.
Wait, you guys, I have a bottle. Let me go grab
Come
it.
on.
God, come on. Really? You have a bottle of... Oh, you do? I remember we were drinking that, weren't we? Maybe. I don't know. This is so funny. Like, this just took off, and it's super interesting.
This is insane. I mean, this is the problem with whiskey, is that you could just talk about it for hours and just get going.
Yeah, and that's what like makes what you do, like, you are. I mean, I know you've branched out, but it's like you've got an endless supply of stuff to talk about, right?
Mexican
in whiskey.
There it is.
Whiskey.
Yeah, and it's
label.
a beautiful bottle. My God,
Isn't
look at that.
Stunning.
That is a gorgeous
It's,
bottle. It
it's
almost
out
looks
of
Japanese.
Oaxaca.
Oh.
Yeah, it's out of
It's
Oaxaca.
Yep. Is that corn on the
it's
label?
Prieto. Prieto e Prieta. Whiskey Mexicano.
If I remember correctly, I think it is corn on the label. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it only makes sense that they would be coming out with whiskeys in the category with corn. I mean, they're
why not?
What is it, masa that they use? I mean, makes sense.
Yep. Think about it, right? Like, if you think about Mexican blue corn and you think about the quality of the corn, I think that a lot of what goes into very good whiskey is the ingredients.
Totally.
There's a lot to be said about certain parts of production of whiskey. The water plays a huge role. The yeast plays a huge role. The barley plays a huge role. But the casks play a massive role, because that's where you get a lot of your flavor from, is the oak. Right. A lot of whiskeys are matured in wine casks. When I say that, I mean that there's a couple of ways of talking about whiskey here. If we go through the casks, in American whiskey, for bourbon, you must use new American oak. You can only use it on the first run of producing bourbon. And once you're done, you can no longer reuse that for other bourbon. So what do you do with all these oak casks that you have? You sell them. So 95% of the casks in the world are bourbon casks, because they're so cheap, because they're in such abundance in America. So you can purchase a bourbon cask for about $60, a used bourbon cask. Then you get into something that is called sherry oak. Sherry oak is from Jerez, Spain. That is used to mature sherry in dessert wines in Spain, and then also port casks. But your sherry oak, you used to have them at $800 US a barrel for an empty barrel. Jeez. There is a sherry shortage now, and it is now around 6,000 pounds per empty barrel of sherry right now.
No.
Seriously. Yes.
And would you say that that is one of the reasons why whiskey is and can be an expensive category, is just because of the aging process and the cost of that process?
If you think about it, that's a great question. If you think about it, in Scotch whiskey, I'm being very genuine when I tell you that 18 years right now is quite young. You have an 80 and an 81 year that were just released by Gordon and MacPhail for the 80 and Macallan for the 81.
Jeez.
And you're talking about literally being put into casks in 1940.
Yeah.
So you've gone through 3 or 4 generations of family, quite frankly. So you have to you have to factor in that time to create a product that's going to pay itself off 80 years down the line, right? So, your pricing has got to be at a reasonable rate because of the amount of time that it takes to mature, so that you can continue to be in business. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's quite a long process. So the other interesting thing is that in bourbon, I would say that a very good age for bourbon is 10 years. And people ask why they don't have older bourbon out there, and this is a very simple answer. Corn breaks down much easier than single malted barley. So the first thing that you're going to see is that, generally speaking, you're making bourbon rather in Kentucky. Yes, you are making it in all 50 states. Don't get me wrong, but initiated in Kentucky. The climate in Kentucky is extremely hot summers and extremely cold winters. What that does in a rick house where you keep all your barrels is that expands the wood from the oak from the casks, and it contracts the wood in the wintertime. That amount of breathing with the alcohol leads to a lot of burn off in the alcohol. So someone asked on one of our panels at Aspen Food and Wine, why don't you see older bourbons? And Connor O'Driscoll, the master distiller from Heaven Hill, put it best. He said, well, I'll give you the simple answer right now. We just took down a 24-year cask from the 9th floor of our rick house, and we went to empty it, and there was nothing to empty. It was completely burnt off.
Yeah, so it evaporates.
The evaporation of the alcohol at such a high alcoholic content in the cask, times the time, times the heat, burnt everything off, because the angel share, which is what burns off, is so rapid. Whereas in Scotland, you're extremely cold, and then maybe you're mild at best in the summers, but your winters and your summers are nowhere near those in Kentucky, and so your oak isn't expanding and contrasting at any sort of rapid rate, coupled with the maturity of malted barley and the slow degradation of it, so to speak. And you can do a 100-year whiskey, which someone is going to do very soon. I can tell you that within the next 10 years or so, something will happen with 90s and 100s. So it's quite interesting. But you will never see anything older. I mean, the oldest I think we've got is like 30 or 31 in bourbon to ever be produced.
Well, speaking of whiskey, I am thirsty. I want to get my lips around this.
I know. I guess I went to Ireland and did a tasting there, but it has been a while since I've done a tasting. So, Nate, I want you to walk us through, if someone has never done a tasting, how do we do it? What are we looking for? Just give us the whole spiel on sipping whiskey and when we should add all the things.
All right.
Okay, so great questions. First of all, let's talk about what we're tasting. We are tasting Virginia Distillery, which is an American single malt. So American single malt is a newer category. It is essentially our version of Scotch whiskey. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Virginia is just producing some amazing stuff right now. They're winning awards left, right, and center. They have Cuvée cask. They have red wine cask. They have sherry, which is what we're trying right now. This is a sherry cask. But it's a really interesting product because they have very hot summers in Virginia and very cold winters. And so you're seeing that influx of the temperature change in American single malt, which is, like we were talking about, malted barley. So they're going to have products for decades to come, generations to come out of Virginia that are going to be superior quality American single malt whiskey. I think you're going to see American single malts pop up much more over the next decade here. There's some great brands out there, Stranahan's, Cedar Ridge, and Virginia Distillery here.
And question, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you said single malt whiskey, which I see here. So Where would
Yes.
that be if I'm, generic between a bourbon, a rye, and a Scotch? Would that be in between a bourbon and a rye? Where would that fall in?
No, that's a great question. That would be identical to Scotch whiskey.
Okay.
So
okay.
totally different than bourbon and rye.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the identical notes of Scotch whiskey in American single malt. So it's single malt Scotch whiskey and blended Scotch whiskey. This would be identical to a single malt Scotch whiskey. So when you think of what you were talking about earlier, Uncle Brad, Oban, this would be a lot more towards that than it would, let's say, a Michter's or a Heaven Hill or a Pappy Van Winkle. Those are going to be on the bourbon sides of things.
Yep.
But from a perspective of creation, this is identical to Scotland in a lot of ways. So must be 100% malted barley. You can use any sort of cask, and they've chosen here to use the Sherry Cask to mature. So you don't adhere to the laws of bourbon by having American single malt, which is really, really nice. Now, the other half to note is that all American single malts are quite young nowadays because it's a new category. So the oldest you're going to see out there is like a 12-year right now, and that's coming from Stranahan's. But Canadian single malts and American single malts are absolutely booming right now. If you're on the Canadian side of things, there's Shelter Point. Shelter Point is aiming to change the stigma of Canadian whiskey, which the stigma is horrendous. They sell more Crown Royal in the state of Texas than they do in all of Canada. Dollar shots at the UT Austin bar. True story.
Well, we sell a lot of Windsor here in Minnesota, so
yes, that's right. That's right.
what was coming over the line during Prohibition and just stuck around.
Oh gosh, and stuck around, never left. No,
never left.
So that's a great question because the notes that you're going to be tasting, Jules, are going to be far more similar to Scotch than they would be to bourbon. So the difference is bourbon and rye. You're using the rye grain or using the corn for bourbon. Those are going to bring out a lot of baked goods, a lot of candy notes that you will have, whereas single malts are going to produce a lot of fruit notes. And those fruit notes are going to be far different than what you'd have in a bourbon or a rye. So when you're smelling this, what you want to do is you actually want to keep your mouth open as you're smelling through your nose and put your nose into the glass as much or as little as you want, but essentially the flavor that's going to come out is going to be, you're going to be able to taste the flavor on your palate without actually tasting it if you keep your mouth open.
Yeah, you can totally taste it in the back of your mouth.
Right in the back of your throat.
It
Very
smells
different.
so good too, by the way.
Yeah, the quality is just unbelievable. And, this is a great percentage to be at 46%. It's a very steady percentage in terms of ABV.
Would I need to swirl it like wine to get air in it? Is there any technique there?
Great question. I don't mind a swirl at all. I think actually leaving it out and open for a little bit of time is quite nice because whenever you open a new bottle, from day 1 to day 2, there is going to be a drastic change. A lot of it is due to the oxidation, and that's going to change the format and the complexity and the essentially the backbone of the spirit when you allow the air to get in there. So when you're smelling this, you keep your mouth open, but when you're tasting it, there's a couple of things here, and you asked a very good question earlier. What do you do with water and things like that? I, generally speaking, don't drink with ice. I know a lot of people that do, and that's totally okay, but let's just break it down from a science perspective, or honestly, like an everyday perspective. When you wake up, you have a hot shower or a cold shower?
Hot.
You have a hot shower.
I do a hot, yeah.
You open up your pores, you clean your body. It's just something we do. Whiskey is an extremely porous drink. If you open up your wine and you have a whiskey that was matured in wine casks, why wouldn't you open up your whiskey? So decanting your whiskey is a very big thing in our world. This was matured in sherry oak, so this is sherry wine. So opening up that whiskey is just as important as opening up the wine, if not more so, because you're dealing at a much higher alcoholic content than you were with wine. The second thing is, if you have a hot shower versus a cold shower, if a cold shower, your pores close. When you add ice to your whiskey, whiskey is an extremely porous drink. So you have this cold ice cube hitting your whiskey. That whiskey's pores are closing when the cold hits it. Then that cold is hitting your tongue. Your tongue has 10,000 pores. Therefore, your tongue's pores are going to close off right away. You are probably going to taste 20 to 25% of what you were intended to taste by putting ice into your whiskey. If you are going to properly taste your whiskey, you would want to open it up with 2 to 3 drops of warm to hot water. It doesn't sound like a lot, but first of all, when you're talking about whiskey, you're not pouring more than half an ounce to an ounce in a glass, maybe 2 ounces. But if you're doing that and you're opening it up with 2 or 3 drops or 3 or 4 drops of hot water, you're taking down the alcohol content with quite a bit of water, and you're bringing out the flavors immediately because you're lowering the alcoholic content right off the bat. So when you lower that alcohol content, other things do come out in the nose and the palate.
I have never heard hot water before. I mean, I've heard warm water, hot water. All right.
I think it's fantastic because it's the same as a shower.
God, you heard it here first, folks.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm a hot water diehard on this sort of stuff. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And it doesn't become like a hot toddy, don't get me wrong. It's still small enough amount of water to
it's not
going to
make the drink hot.
No,
it's just a little bit.
Exactly.
And so I haven't tasted mine yet because I want to know, like normally when I would taste like a wine,
you're slugging away like, it's great.
Well, I want to make sure I'm doing it right to get the flavor. So I know with some spirits, a lot of times, some spirits will say, take the first sip and swallow it because it'll cleanse your palate. Don't know if there's a rhyme or reason to that or if that's actually true. And then what I normally do, which is probably wrong for certain spirits because I do it with wine, it's just habit, is I'll bring in air when I'm sipping and kind of let it sit in my mouth for a second and then swallow it. But is there a correct way now to taste, from the first sip to getting all the flavors?
Yeah, that's a great question. So whenever I do a whiskey tasting, first of all, let's say my whiskey tasting is 6 bottles. First of all, the first bottle I'm going to have is going to open up and warm your palate up. I would never subject someone to a cask strength whiskey in the first go. Okay. Meaning that if you have a whiskey in your whiskey tasting that's 65%, that's not going to be the first one we taste. That 65% is going to burn your palate because it's such a high alcoholic content. Right. What you want to do is you want to warm your palate up. So if you're in the 40 to 45, 48% range, that'll allow your palate to warm up to what you're about to taste. So you're not just going in cold and hitting your palate with 65%. So you always want to warm up with something. The second thing is a lot of whiskey tastings are going to save the best for last. That's probably the worst way to do a tasting. And the reason for that is that by the time you're done your third whiskey, your palate is so coated in alcohol, especially at cask strength, 4, 5, and 6 are going to be completely useless to you. Yeah. So you want to be able to go best first down to the last one that you're going to try. And so what you would want to do is have a warm-up and then go into your best whiskey right after that. That would be my preference in a whiskey tasting. Just full-blown, full transparent. If you guys see things like this at a Total Wine or a Bevmo, try the best first. Always a crucial role in something like this. Absolutely. Okay. The next thing you're going to want to do is understand the cask strength versus non-cask strength category. So your middles should be in your cask strengths, and then you can wind down or whatever you want to do. But if you're wanting to taste through these at a high proof, understanding what you're trying is going to be quite crucial. The other half on the Scotch side of things is a place called Islay. Islay is smoky, peaty whiskey. When you are tasting through smoky, peaty whiskeys, this is really interesting, and it's very important to not do those until the absolute very end. The smoke and the peat is the same thing as having a cask strength whiskey, except that the smoke and the peat is going to burn your palate off worse than what the cask strength whiskey would. So all you're going to taste if you try those first is going to be smoky, peaty goodness, but you'll never get the other whiskeys that were intended to try. So if you're going to do a whiskey tasting on the Scotch side of things, you would want to start out with your sherries and your lowlands and things like that, and then you would want to work your way over to the smoky peaty at the very end. That's another quick tip to remember. But as we're tasting through this is going to be a honest to God fruit bomb, and that's because it is a American single malt, so malted barley plus the sherry cask. Sherry is going to get you a lot of dark fruits right off the bat. Yep. But I'm actually very curious for Jules' notes out of this because your notes are going to be far more superior than my notes. Even though it might be my profession, nothing can beat a woman's touch. So I want to hear what you've got here on the palate.
Well, I will say, smelling it with my mouth open, I got some flavors. One, I think, would be plum. Also, orange, some cinnamon.
Jules.
Major plum, massive plum on this one. Yeah, absolutely.
I totally didn't even pick that up. That's amazing.
That's why, right? And then when you're drinking it, keep it in your mouth and coat your mouth for about 6 to 10 seconds if you can before swallowing. That's really going to get your palate going. And cheers, by the way.
Whoa, cheers. Wow. No wonder you're slugging this, Brad.
Yeah, I'm just pounding it seriously, like I'm at a bar doing shots.
On the flavor, though, I am getting a little bit more of
Not quite. Oh, that was
tobacco, little tobacco flavor in there.
Massive.
So I just coated my mouth, and that really made a difference.
Huge difference.
Really made a difference. Wow.
Because you have to understand that everything that comes in contact with your mouth is going to affect your palate, right? So that's why there are pairings with dark chocolates and fruits and cheeses and things like that make the whiskey so much better a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And so you're going to want to pick things that are going to add flavor. You never really get into it too heavy of a meal of like a sandwich or things like that when you're doing whiskey, because there's so much flavor going on in a sandwich that it's going to be hard to pick up all the other flavors in a whiskey. So a lot of people like a steak in a whiskey, and that's a very basic pairing because it's a steak, and then your whiskey can pick up the flavors and add to the flavors of the steak. But there are some amazing things to do out there when it comes to tasting whiskeys. But the fact that you're coating your mouth with it erases all the other flavors that came into your mouth and takes that into consideration as you are drinking it from now on. So,
and I don't know about you guys, but I think more so than the back, the middle of my tongue is where there's heat there, right? You can definitely feel in the middle, not the front, not the back, not the sides, but I'm getting it very much in the middle there. I don't know about you, Brad. What do you get?
Not so much here or here, more like right here.
Right
yeah,
there.
but it's so interesting though when you actually make a conscious effort to think about where it's touching, those pores, like you were saying. I'm getting it very much like in that middle section.
And that's a great point, because in Islay, on the smoke and the peat, I get it all on the sides of my tongue and in my cheeks. And so each whiskey has a different target for sure. In Japanese whiskey, it's all floral notes in Japanese whiskey.
Yeah.
So even if it's sherried, you're going to get sherry like we have now, but coupled with a floral note. So that's just the delicateness of Japan hitting you in that way. But this is quite interesting with how it comes across here. It's not overbearing at all. That's what I think Virginia is doing so well right now, is that they're making a whiskey that's so well balanced, yet still relatively young, 5 to 7 years, and the quality you're getting out of that at that age is superior.
Yeah.
Quite superb, yeah.
I could see this being, I do, I get it. And I think now more than ever, because I'm in this space and, you can only use a generic, spirit so much until you really want to start expanding and understanding flavor. At a certain point, my whole, preference has totally changed from, very, I don't want to say sugary, but very sweet, on ice, those kinds of cocktails. It's changed into, I want more, spirit forward. And I want more that's just, you only have so many ingredients, but each play so well together. And I can see how this category, which is so broad in and of itself, you can really get lost in it because there's so much to each bottle.
Yeah.
And that's where I think American Single Malt is going to make a huge dent and grow the American whiskey category as a whole. And so that's why I brought you Virginia today versus bringing you a standard bourbon, because bourbons are already out there, right?
Yeah.
But ASM, American Single Malt, you're talking about production from Westland in Seattle all the way to Balcones in Texas, across to Virginia Distillery, and you've got some amazing single malts that are literally around a lot of the states right now. Westward in Oregon is phenomenal, but this is something that's so new to have all these whiskeys come out of different states. Every state's climate is so different and so significant in what they're doing. There is, it's drawing a blank on the name of it, from New Mexico. And, New Mexico, a lot of people don't know that New Mexico gets extremely cold in the winter and then extremely hot in the summer. and you're getting that southern heat combined with that is quite interesting, to be honest with you. So there's a lot of situations you're going to see American single malt pop up in across the U.S. right now.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. God, that's good. All right, so smell.
And Brad, I'm actually curious of your nose and your tasting points on here.
Well, yeah. So I am terrible at this.
No.
No, I really am. Let's see here. So. What am I getting? It tastes like whiskey and wood to me, but it's delicious. I don't know how to put my finger on it.
Well, you know what? That's a great point. The oak is probably the best way to categorize that, right? Is that the oak is coming off quite potent here, absolutely. Yeah. So
I'm getting like that blackberry currant,
That's so
dark
good.
chocolate.
God damn it! I can't do it.
See, this is
but it's
what
funny.
Women are so good at, unlike men.
See, now that you say that,
tastings.
I can taste it. And so it's funny because, I've gone to many tastings and like sometimes I can pick stuff out, right? Like I can just you can pick it out, right? But if I get a little kind of nudge, like here's what you're looking for, it's like, hint. Yes. And this is what happened to me. And I know I'm going to talk about wine for a second. I moved out to California and I'm out there with my then girlfriend turned fiance, now wife. And we were going around the different wineries, right? So... yeah, no, we stuck together, and I would choke that stuff down. I mean, I am like literally like, what do people like about wine? And then one day, a guy's like, "All right, so you should be tasting a little black cherry," and I put it in my mouth. I was like, "Ding! There it is, the black cherry." And then it was like, it was wide open after that. All of a sudden, like I knew what I was looking for. I don't know if I'm just not one of those people who can search for the thing I'm looking for, but if you tell me to find it, I'll find it.
I really like this point because if I can make a suggestion, someone once said to me, their very esteemed colleague, who said 60% of what you're tasting is your childhood. So there's a lot of the notes in some whiskeys that are like, oh my God, I got fuzzy peaches or sour.
Yeah, no, this doesn't taste like Windsor and Tab to me, so.
Oh no. Oh goodness.
Might have been making those in the back of my dad's car on the way up to the cabin. 8 years old. I'm saying.
I love you, dude.
But see, now I'm going to dabble
is there like toffee in there? What is that? Is it
the Mexican one that I have, just to kind of give a total different.
Nice choice. And I'm going to switch up too. I think that's a great idea.
All right, well, I'll switch up.
Yeah. P.S. Even on the nose, this is completely
wild.
different.
So
it's
different.
insane.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Quality
for everybody listening, something we've talked about before, but highly suggest, is to have a dinner party centered around a spirits tasting. Have whoever's invited bring over a bottle, maybe some, especially in the whiskey category, somebody picks a scotch, a single malt, someone grabs a bourbon, whatever it is, or maybe it's a percentage of alcohol. But then you do a tasting and you can sample. That, for me, would be the best dinner party ever. And yes,
I would love to do a
Uber
spirits
home.
tasting for like a party. In fact, well, I kind of have. So, all right. So now I'm going to try this Nika coffee malt whiskey. I don't know if we can talk about that on this since we're talking about Virginia, but
whoa.
Oh.
Have you had the Nika?
Oh, you are laughing with that bottle. That is just a phenomenal bottle.
I love it.
Anything Nika touches turns to gold.
Yeah.
Wow.
Anything Nika touches turns to gold. Yeah. I've got an array of things here in front of me, and
I smell banana.
Go through a couple of those.
Right off the bat, I smell banana. It's just so strong.
I want to tell you about that, if you don't mind. There is a chemical compound between the oak and single malt that creates the bourbon flavor in whiskey. That is what you're tasting right there. That banana is literally a chemical compound.
Yeah.
That when the oak hits that whiskey, that occurs. And that occurs in a lot of single malts and blended malts.
It is like an unmistakable banana. Yeah.
Spot on.
Well, so we're kind of dabbling in a couple of different things, but I think one thing that people might be wondering is if they want to do this at home, Nate, are there specific glasses people should go out and buy? And if they do, does it really make a difference?
Great question. Absolutely. a huge difference. It's a game changer. This company that I have right now, this is from Wonders of Whiskey. This is a tulip. The tulip is because the flavor collects at the base of the glass, right up into the mid, and then plummets it all into sort of like a push forward at the top here, which is much smaller, as you can see. That's one great glass. Another great glass that I would recommend, obviously, Glencairn is the official glass of whiskey. That Glencairn is the official glass of whiskey. But there is a company that I think is doing fantastic things called Denver and Liley, and they are doing amazing glassware. And they have now created glassware specific to what you're trying. So they now have a Scotch glass, they have a bourbon glass, they have a tequila glass, and a mezcal glass. Oh. And they are very, very different shapes and equally beautiful, but stunning to see the difference between putting mezcal in a regular glass and putting it in their mezcal glass is just unbelievable.
Wow.
So you're seeing a lot of that come out right now. And I do think it absolutely all makes a huge difference for sure. The other thing to remember, and why I think spirits are becoming a much bigger push in the world of collectibles, is because eventually you do stumble upon people that are drinking these extremely high-end bottles. And why I say that is because you are seeing an immense amount of $100,000 wines that are corked when you're opening them.
Yeah.
And if you're going to spend $100,000 to open a bottle of wine and it's bad, why not just do the same and almost guarantee that it's pretty much not going to be spoiled if it's in whiskey? I mean, I've had 2 bad bottles of whiskey in my life. And the reason that whiskey doesn't go bad is the alcoholic content is too high to allow it to go bad, whereas the alcoholic content in wine is too low to allow it to stay good.
But you also don't want to let your whiskey like sit in the sunlight or something like that.
That
either,
will be
right?
one way that it goes bad. Exactly. Yeah. So if you're storing at the right room temperature, keep it in a cool, dry environment. It's crucial for both whiskey and wine.
Would you say that alcohol, the category as a whole, and maybe specifically whiskey, do you think it's becoming or will become as big as wine is?
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
And do you think that would be the way that we're doing, just sipping and really, buying these really beautiful bottles that have aged? Or do you think it would be because of using them in elevated cocktails? Or do you see this more as, no, this is something that people collect, they sip, they store, they continue? Like, how do you see this space growing?
I have one sentence. Whiskey is friendly, wine is snobby. Everybody wants to try whiskey, and then you sit at a bar and you have a $10 bottle, and the guy wants you to try it, and he tries it, and he loves it, and then he has a $1,000 bottle, and he wants you to try it, and you try it. The point of the story is that there's no difference. Everybody in our community has just been so friendly, and they just want you to try the fruits of the labor of what they've got in front of them. And I think that's probably the biggest difference between whiskey and wine. I love my wine, don't get me wrong. Let's say you have a bottle of whiskey that's $100 and you have a bottle of wine that's $100. That's a very expensive bottle of wine that will last you 4 hours maybe, right?
Right.
Then you have a bottle of whiskey at the alcohol content being as high as it is. I know an individual that has 1 ounce of a very special pour from the bottle on every year on his birthday. And he's done it 26 years, which is 26 years of whiskey. And it changes every time, but it never goes bad.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the beauty of whiskey, is the alcohol content allows you to preserve it with still having oxidation, change it, and make it more complex year after year, which I find very fascinating in our industry.
All right, Nate, I've got a tip for you that I wonder if you know. Not a tip, fun fact.
Oh, I'm pumped.
Do you know why these bottles are 750 milliliters?
I cannot say I do.
Okay, I got your answer.
I don't think have we talked about this on the podcast before?
We haven't. Actually, I've been saving this one for the right moment.
Okay. Whew. I was like, should I know this?
It is the lung capacity of glass blowers before they could machine bottles.
What?
I didn't know this.
Lung capacity. And finally,
You're lying.
Great Britain. Nope. Great Britain said, or England said, we are going to just standardize this 750 milliliters. Because sometimes it'd be 700, sometimes it'd be like 775. Yeah. It's the lung capacity of glass blowers.
Are you serious?
Yeah, that's honestly the truth.
I feel like the NBC, the more you know star just flew above the sky. You remember that commercial?
Yes.
Yes. That one right there. Yeah. Oh my God. Thank you.
Seriously, fun fact. Now you can tell people.
Wow.
Okay.
This was awesome.
I have a question that you could tip our listeners to, which we've already had so many throughout this episode. But we've talked about sipping whiskey and we've talked about the categories. Now, for all my cocktailers out there, which I know we have a lot of, are there any specifics? Yeah. Are there any specifics you recommend to look out for, or maybe some bottles people normally wouldn't go for cocktails? Do you have any whiskey cocktail tips for our listeners?
Yes, absolutely. And that's a great question. So for starters, Virginia has 2 different categories that we're tasting right now. Under the Courage and Conviction labels, they have their regulars and they have their cask strengths. I think the regulars are really good for cocktails. And the reason for that is that the cask strength whiskey does not make the cocktail overbearing if you're using a regular strength whiskey. So instead of putting 60% in it, you're putting 46%. That still allows for a lot of the other flavors of the cocktail to come through. That's the first thing. The second thing is, instead of using a bourbon in a lot of your drinks, try it with a rye.
Agree.
That is a huge difference right there. The rye adds so many soft notes to a cocktail that make the cocktail so much nicer in a lot of instances. And then the last thing I would say is, sometimes you can sub your cocktail for one spirit or another. So one thing that I've been doing right now, which is my favorite, is the mezcal Negroni.
Yes.
Which instead of a Negroni.
It's so good.
Yeah, it's so good. And you're taking the forward notes of gin and you're removing those and adding so much intricacies of mezcal, that smoke, that terroir, that earthiness, and you're flipping it on its head by doing something like that. So it's always fun to play around. The other thing I will say is, one time I went live on Instagram with a expensive bottle of whiskey in a cocktail, and I got crucified for doing this.
No.
Absolutely crucified.
No.
People screamed at me to the heavens, and I was
that sounds like the internet. Yeah.
Well,
that's the internet. Yeah. But here's my point, that why I don't like that is that in my industry as a professional, I'm always trying to understand flavor. If I have a high-end whiskey that has more complex flavors than a lower or mid-tier whiskey, I'm going to be able to bring more out in the cocktail that I'm creating. So don't be afraid to try a $300 or $400 bottle and make yourself a cocktail with that. Heaven forbid you use 1 or 2 ounces out of a 26-ounce bottle to try something different.
Right.
But, that's not to say that you have to go and make a Macallan M cocktail like they have at the Cosmopolitan for $1,500 a cocktail. But, you can literally do a nicer, more elevated and more sophisticated cocktail with a better whiskey, just plain and simple. So you don't always have to use the lowest end whiskey to make a cocktail. Try using something higher and nicer to make a really good cocktail.
Yeah, Brad, you and I, we really drill home ingredients matter. So why would we be, saying anything different for the spirit that we use? I want to talk about is tales of the cocktails.
Yes.
I want you to tell us what you're doing.
Yeah, bring it on.
How we can, just tell us everything. Yeah.
I love this, and thank you for giving me a quick little spot to talk about this amazing thing. So Tales of the Cocktail is the largest cocktail show in the world. Every year in New Orleans. It's now world-renowned. 25,000 people come through the week to the show, and I was given an opportunity to have my own spirits lounge at Tales of the Cocktail this year in New Orleans. So it is a 4-day event of the best spirits that you can try. Very cool, unique opportunities. There'll be an oyster luge, meaning that when your oyster goes down the luge, it comes into whiskey, and you sip your whiskey with your oyster shot, and it's fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We'll be there.
Oh my God, it is the funnest, most delicious thing you'll ever have.
Like, can you get your uncle off the luge?
Literally, get your uncle off the luge.
I'm gonna be like
Oh my
Pac-Man.
God.
Yum 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 yum.
I'm gonna say that I'm probably gonna go through, like, I would say if there's 3,000 people coming through my lounge, I'm gonna go with 6,000 oysters. I think that's probably the number that I'm gonna have to pick.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah. We'll make sure to get there early.
Right.
God, Nate.
It's going to be fantastic, though.
Amazing.
There's a lot of master distillers are going to come through and have speeches at our panels. It's going to be a heck of a time. So I highly encourage anybody that wants to come through and see an amazing cocktail show to come say hi at Spirits Lounge. It's going to be fantastic. July 22nd to 25th this year.
And anybody can go, right?
Anybody can go, correct. It's going to be great.
Yeah. Tickets go on sale, what, May, I think? Are they going on sale? Or is it, okay, cool. May. Yeah, I'm excited. I can't wait for July. It's going to be here, like, I know it's only
Before we
February,
know
but it's literally
I'm so
around
excited
the
to
corner.
have you guys there. You're going to kill it.
Yeah.
Oh
Everybody, if you can, should go out, look it up, Tales of the Cocktails. And then Nate, will you just give us one last spiel of where can we find you? What's your website? Everybody wants to know, where should we go?
Absolutely. You can go to singlemaltdaily.com, singlemaltdaily.com. My Instagram is Nate Gana, Nategana, and you can find me writing all over the place and gallivanting the world, tasting whiskey so you guys don't have to until you really need to.
Perfect.
Yeah. Awesome.
Sweet.
I love it. Tasting whiskeys so you don't have to until you really need to. We need a catchy tagline, Jules.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah. Well, this was so much fun. Thank you for sipping with us. It's different. It's out of our ordinary, but I like this. I think maybe we might have to revisit tasting again. So we might see you again soon, Nate.
I really hope so. I would love to be on this show more than one occasion. Please let me know.
Dude,
I will clear my schedule to be on with you guys.
Oh my God, for sure. Count on it. It'll be the
Thank you so
Nate
much
Gana
for
show
having
soon.
me.
So,
Yeah, seriously.
all right, cool, man.
Gosh.
Thank you
Thank you so much, guys.
All right.